we were talking earlier in the program about the fact that Europe now is planning on banning all cars by the year 2050, and how this fits into the whole sustainable development situation. And now, in this past week, I guess we have a number of different people in the state of Oregon that have come out now against wolves. We have the rewilding project going on as a part of Agenda 21 as they move people out of the rural areas, ladies and gentlemen. The United States is being rewilded. They're bringing in wolves. They're bringing in other wildlife and introducing them to certain areas, and this is causing major problems, and I think we need to talk about it. We have Jim Beers joining us. Jim spent 30 years with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and he is a wildlands biologist, a wetlands biologist. He knows his stuff, folks. He's been there for 30 years. He's been a professional with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and he was a congressional fellow and the chief of operations for the National Wildlife Refuge System, program coordinator for the Animal Damage Control System. And for his final 7 years, he is a wildlife biologist in the Central Office who served as project manager for nearly all national wildlife projects funded through the Pittman-Robertson money. He retired in 1999. He was forced out because he wouldn't go along, and he holds a bachelor's in wildlife resources from Utah State University and a master's in public administration from the University of Northern Colorado. Anyway, he's joining us today, and he's here to give us his expertise on a number of different topics. Jim, I want to get right into your story about how you were forced out of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I guess you got involved. Last time we visited, you were talking about how your parents came from Germany, immigrated to the United States, or I guess their parents did.
Yeah, it was their parents, yeah.
Yeah, and in Germany, only the rich were allowed to hunt and trap and fish, and they came here and they escaped all that, and they were able to enjoy the outdoors and instill that love of outdoors in you. And that's one of the reasons why you got involved in this field. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And then, but during the course of your time there at the Fish and Wildlife Service, you started seeing the agency morph into something that was drastically different than what it had been. Would that be fair to say?
That's exactly right, yeah. And I think the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management were changing in the same way at the same time. So I've come to find that all out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How far back does this go? Because I whenever I talk about to people about you and your story, and I think you're such a critical part of the dialogue, because there's not very many people that I'm aware of that have your level of knowledge and expertise in this field that have been so outspoken. I really can't think of anybody else.
Well, it was an accident in a way that the time that I worked in the field of wildlife management was the time that these changes were coming about, and I could see them around me. Mm-hmm. And if I'd have been maybe 10 years older or 10 years younger, I don't think I would have seen what I saw and understood it as I have come to understand it.
Mm. So it's almost like God placed you in that position at that specific time in order for you, basically, to prepare you for the work that you're doing now.
Well, I feel like it's very important work, and I feel that my experiences and my knowledge about those changes are very important for the people that are being affected by wolves and being affected by environmental challenges and by the loss of property rights and the whole change in the structure of the government, the federal government taking over more and more of the state's authorities. And mm-hmm. I just read the other day where recently the average state now gets more than half of its money from the federal government. So you can imagine who's really playing the tune that the state employees dance to. More and more federal lands getting bought and then closed and not used. There's an awful lot of very serious matters going on. I think a lot of this, honestly, has a lot to do with the whole precedent that we call the Kelso decision, where the federal government, now the state or the city, can just come in and say, well, that's too bad about your old homes here. We're just going to tear those down and put in condominiums here, and you got to move out. the whole concept of our rights enshrined in the Constitution just getting eroded like we see with gun rights and so many other things that are in the Constitution. So I think my experience in the area, the environmental and animal rights area and the government area and how it all comes together, I think helps a lot of people, and that's really what I try to do is help them understand things so they're more effective in defending their own rights.
Mm-hmm. Now, whenever I talk to people about your story and about you, I've always gone back to the Clinton years where you have said that you really began seeing an influx of people, with more of a political agenda rather than an environmental management, in other words, having the environment in the best interest in front and center of what they are all about. But really, it goes back much further than the Clinton administration, doesn't it?
That's correct. It really seems to go back to all of that social turbulence in the 60s, the anti-Vietnam War, free sex, free drugs, hippies, vans, challenge authority, the whole throw everything over, the kind of hatred of America, and all of that turbulence in there. Right at the end of that is when you got Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Animal Welfare Act, all these federal laws about saving animals and preserving the environment and returning to nature, and the federal land should be closed off, and the states shouldn't be able to kill animals, and hunters are bad, and ranchers are bad, and loggers are bad, and that whole goofiness in there immediately kind of created federal politicians that catered to that. They said, oh, yeah, we'll pass an Endangered Species Act. The federal government will save the animals. The federal government will stop logging and stop grazing because it destroys the environment, all of which is all lies and craziness. But the people that hated America, and a lot of people in urban areas that like nature, like to go to a park, or even Yellowstone Park or something, but like to think that they're not destroying the world or the environment, bought into those lies. And the people that were behind all of that, the organizations, the Humane Society, the Sierra Club, the World Wildlife Foundation, they started to make a lot of money out of it. They did a lot of focus groups. They honed their message. And in the federal government, a big factor, and I got 2 daughters, and I love them dearly, don't get me wrong here, but the big factor was it just coincided with the equal opportunity business. The whole stuff about women and minorities had been mistreated. So the federal government suddenly, for the first time in its history, started categorizing people by sex and race in the census, and in hiring at the federal level and promoting people. And they said, well, these people have all been oppressed for centuries, and we're going to give them all a break, and, we're still doing all of that. It'll never stop. But be that as it may, when they did that, it coincided with all of this business about we need to save the marine mammals, save the whales, save the seals, we need to stop logging out west, everything's going to erode and go away, blah, blah, blah. Because the federal government, in its hiring, promoting, and transferring policies, started paying bonuses for women and minorities, and there weren't women and minorities around that could meet the qualifications that they used to have to be a forester or a range manager or a wildlife manager, a wildlife biologist. And the federal government's hiring policy was that you had to take an exam and you got put on a list, and only the top 3 people or something went to the people that were hiring, and they had to hire off of that list. You had to have so many hours of wildlife biology or forest management to be a forester, for instance. And also there was a whole bunch of standards within the government for promotions and transfer. In other words, to get the next grade up, you had to supervise at least 11 people, and or you had to have experience in a regional office or the Washington office, and you had to have worked in 2 divisions or things like that. Those all got in the way of hiring and promoting and transferring women and minorities and giving bonuses to the top managers. So they just, within a few years, they said, well, why does anybody have to have that many hours of wildlife biology? And what difference does it make if you've worked in 2 regions or not, blah, blah, blah. So there was a big, especially of females, into the Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. Now,
in other words, what you're saying is they had what would appear, I think, to you and me as an orchestrated dumbing down of the process.
Well, they did
not to say that women and minorities are dumb,
but think of
if they're not qualified to do the job, they shouldn't be doing the job.
Well, yeah, but the two things are going on now. At this time, back in the 70s and 80s, you've got this, the federal government's going to save everything. The federal government's going to stop them from cutting all the trees. The federal government's going to save the whales. Fill in whatever you want. At the same time, they're saying, we're going to hire more women, especially women, and we're going to promote them a lot, and I'll get a bonus, and we got to get rid of the standards. So into that sort of vacuum that was being created really stepped the Humane Society of the United States, the Sierra Club, the Center for Biological Diversity, the Natural Resources Defense Council, et al. And there's probably 40 or 50 of them that are big ones, because you got several hundred smaller ones. And they started trying to influence the federal government as much as they could at the same time anyway. And if you be honest, think about the young women coming out of college at that time and today that are in pre-veterinary medicine or something because they love their golden retriever, or they're in some other thing that because they love animals and they want to save things, and they're women in a lot of sense. I mean, their emotions, everything else are a little different than the guys are. They probably felt very, very negatively about things like trapping and like shooting birds or shooting deer, or killing elk. A lot of them are urban girls. A lot of those urban girls, like a lot of urban guys, their parents had a lot of influence with the government, so there were no standards anymore. So you wind up hiring senators' daughters, like Fish and Wildlife Service did, off the street at high grades to get things because there were no longer any requirements. And you can hire this congressman's big contributor's daughter that's looking for a job, and
political favors and quid pro quos.
Ultimately, what you were doing was stocking the agencies that were formed 100 years ago to manage the timber, to manage...
Hold it right there, Jim. I'm sorry, we have to take a break here. When we come back, we'll continue. Folks, this is Govern America. We're visiting with Jim Beers, and we'll be back here in just a moment. So we're visiting with Jim Beers, and Jim is... He retired from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. As I said earlier, he spent 30 years there, and he's talking about his experiences there when he worked early on and throughout his career. He just happened to be at the right place at the right time to see the changes that we're, certainly living with the result of today. And, Jim, before the break, you were talking about how the agency kind of was in the process of, dumbing down the process by eliminating really the qualifications, the requirements for those that were hirees.
Well, Darren, I wouldn't even put it as dumbing down.
Okay.
I would really say they were refocusing the values. They were making the federal government's purposes not to provide you and me with recreation and hunting and open federal lands that we could go enjoy to camp on and go to cut firewood on, and you could get grazing permits on, and people in local communities could get a benefit from the timber management and everything else. Mm-hmm. They were changing it into this protect everything, close everything down, get rid of hunting, get rid of trapping, take over the state fish and wildlife agencies, close down the roads through the Forest Service, get rid of the grazing permits. They really were changing it into this hardcore, radical agenda of the Sierra Club, the Humane Society of the United States, the Animal Welfare Institute, and the whole rest of that pack of buggers that are just really, really trying to destroy this country and the values and that we know.
In other words, locking up the land. That's
locking up the land and doing away with private property and making us all more and more subject to federal rule while eliminating the states. Because, again, these new employees with their agenda to shut down everything and clear out the rural countryside and get rid of all those cows munching on grass and those guys with their chainsaws and those guys in the fall with their guns, to get rid of all of that, the state government really can't do that kind of stuff very effectively, except maybe in the East Coast in New Jersey or something. because people won't reelect the governor and legislators that do that. But the federal government can mandate that stuff, and they're not even responsible for it. In other words, they can bring wolves in, and, like it happened up in Saskatchewan just recently, a young man was killed up there by wolves, or up on the Alaska Peninsula, a school teacher was out for a jog and was found dead and half-eaten by wolves. And they can put these wolves out there, and when the wolves start hanging on the bus stop or killing your cows, they can say, well, that's not our responsibility. I didn't do that. I've already been promoted, blah, blah, blah. And the agency is not responsible, so they can kill off the big game herds, the moose and the elk and the deer, destroy hunting. They can kill off a lot of the cows and calves and make ranching more and more expensive. Heck, one of the big problems out there right now is they can hardly use dogs anymore to round up their cattle in the late summer or early fall, because the dogs used to go into the ravines and the heavy cover and everything, where a man on horseback or an ATV has a very hard time of getting around at all, and round them up out of there. Now they send the dogs in there, usually one or two with each guy, and the dogs come running back out of there with 3 or 4 of these cows after them, with snot hanging out of their nose and their eyes bigger than saucers, and going after the dogs because they've been having to live with wolves. And the man gets endangered on his horse and on his ATV, and the dogs are scared witless, so you can't use them anymore. So the cost, the bother, the reporting, and everything else, it just keeps going up and up and up. You can't shoot them in your yard because the federal government says so. If the state government tried to do that to you and me, we'd be into the state capitol and see that governor never got reelected, and whatever state legislator or state senator went along with that he never got reelected either. But the federal government can do that, and what have you got? You got to go after a U.S. senator. Take Baucus or Tester, the two up in Montana right now. They're more wired into and get more support from these national and international wildlife groups and humane groups and everything. So that's who they cater to. And they can get by because they get a lot of money from those people. They get a lot of media support from those people and a lot of publicity and volunteers from them. They can go ahead and get reelected. And this is true of senators in every state, for not representing the interest of the people of that state at the federal level, but for representing national and international radical agendas in this stuff. So you're kind of helpless with the federal government and these agencies that you and I think, well, they kind of work for the politicians, and the politicians can change anything. They're really running the politicians in cahoots with these organizations, because the agencies, by getting more authority in Washington and more budget money and everything else, they get more and more powerful. They can hire more and more people. They get higher and higher grades. They get higher and higher retirements, and the whole thing is just a vicious circle in there. It's got to get broken, or we're not going to have this country that you and I see around us right now in another 30 or 40 years. That's true, maybe even sooner.
Yeah, it's a big problem, and part of the problem too is that these groups, these environmentalist groups, actually take and I almost hate to even call them environmental groups, because they're not really concerned about the environment, in my opinion. Everything they do seems to run counter to proper environmental management anyway.
You're 100% right. The only reason I even use that term is just so people recognize who I'm talking about. But
right.
You're 100% right.
But they have a habit of suing the federal government over different things. Anytime they pass a law or do something to try to do the right thing, and suddenly you got them taking their tax money, suing it in court, and taking the bounty and using it to sue, and do whatever else.
And we've got the condition in this country now where you can shop for a court. You can see it in the Ninth District Court out there in the West Coast. These organizations that we're talking about here, these anti-property rights and environmental animal rights organizations, anti-gun organizations, they meet regularly back in Washington, D.C. Their staff in their headquarters offices back there that do all their lobbying have regular meetings. They have secret meetings with the agency people that they have a big influence on getting appointed in there, in the Forest Service, the BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, the Bureau of Reclamation, the whole 9 yards of them back there that we deal with out here day in and day out in rural America. And they plot out strategies and the ways to do lawsuits. They do that together. and they've got lots and lots of lawyers that are in their top jobs, making them a lot of money, not only from the lawsuits but from the publicity they get. It's all very carefully orchestrated and has been for about 25, 30 years now. And when they go into court, they're looking to try to get precedence out of an environmental thing or out of an animal thing, a wild animal thing, that they can use with domestic animals later on to attack your property rights in your chickens or your dogs or the other things that they want to say that Americans have no right to own, that none of these animals are property anymore, say. So not only are they destroying the concept that they're public property, your property and mine, and therefore it's okay that we kill some and we control them and we manage them for certain ends. They wanted to do that, but they also at the same time want to destroy the private property rights in domestic animals, just like they are setting precedents by doing that with your property rights in your real estate or your property rights in some of the things you own in your own home. See?
Yeah.
So that stuff is all linked up together, and they've gotten you look at this recent Wisconsin business about, wow, if this guy gets in there as Supreme Court justice, that means things will be decided like this. And if that woman gets in there, that means they'll be decided like this other thing over here. I mean, we act like justice is a blind lady with scales up, holding them up in the air. And the truth is that we're getting more and more, like it says in the Bible, I'll just paraphrase it, that when you say a nation divided against itself cannot stand. We cannot have courts and politicians and an autonomous government, central government like this, and persist in our rights and the freedoms and liberties that were named in both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. We're changing into something very bad, and the speed at which it's going to happen or is happening is hard to appreciate when you're there. It's kind of like if we look back at the Soviet Union. If I'd have said back in 1980, oh, don't worry about it, those guys will just collapse overnight one day, well, you'd have thought, well, that guy's crazier than a loon.
Yeah.
But in fact, that government, and I'm not setting that up as any kind of a model,
right?
But I'm just saying that people don't see that going on, both the people living under the Soviet Union or the rest of us living outside of it, that it would collapse like that and change into something very different very quickly.
Right.
And we're playing with the same kind of phenomenon here with the way we're attacking our government and our rights and the way we get along with each other in this society. And a lot of what we're talking about here has a lot to do with it. These people that we're talking about here were described to me once when I was still in the government as having a secret meeting with the director and that I should be very, very careful. Now, this was from someone that was very sensitive and not a big. She was a friend of mine, but not a big fan of the things that I stood for, with hunting and fishing and everything. But she was a good lady. She told me that those people made it very clear that they really hated me.
Wow. And
they were truly evil people. Now, it's not forgetting about me personally here in this thing. That's the kind of mental backing that these folks have got for anyone that's standing in their way of changing things the way they want to do that. And we're all dealing with that. We need to recognize that. It takes more than, I'm just going to have a professor do some research here, and he'll find out A, B, and C, which we all know is the truth. And once the people understand that, everything will be okay. It's not going to be like that at all. It's like recent activities out in the Northwest trying to get those wolves back under state authority. The federal government is a little scared right now that the Endangered Species Act or the Fish and Wildlife Service's authority and budget may have to be cut back if the anti-wolf feeling gets too far out of hand in their view, especially in the Northwest. Montana and Idaho have really had a good glimpse, and so is Wyoming, of what happens when you've got wolves.
Yeah.
And because they're afraid of that, they're saying right now, we'll let you manage them here for right now. The two states can do that, and they'll pass the law, and they will in a heartbeat. If in fact, for whatever reason, because of the debt, the budget, because of Muammar Gaddafi and all this other nonsense, you get these progressive people back in control in Washington, and they're not afraid that there's going to be a big reaction about all the money they spend and about all of the way they grow the federal government. they'll turn right around and yank the rug right back out from under the states. And like you were saying earlier, the control of those wolves out there is no small matter. I mean, it took hundreds of years to get rid of them, and now with all of the impediments that we've put on ourselves, it's a daunting task just to bring them under some kind of control.
Daunting isn't even the word, Jim. It's impossible, because when you'll go to the penitentiary for shooting one of them, I mean, how can you get rid of them?
Well, I mean, not only that, that's the federal thing right now. I mean, you've got them coming in the yard, and they're going after your kid or they're going after your dog right outside. A woman told me when on a trip out to Montana last fall, she told me that she walked into her living room and looked at the dining room window, and there's a wolf up on its hind legs looking in the dining room window.
Oh, my goodness.
All right, now, they're hanging around bus stops.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, if you shoot one, go ahead.
I got a newspaper article. We have a listener in Minnesota just sent me this. She sent me a packet of information. Her name is Karen, but she just one of the clippings that she sent was from the Cook County News Herald in Grand Marais, Minnesota.
Grand Marais.
Marais. I knew I was going to butcher the name. Forgive me. But anyway, that's one of the problems I have. But anyway, snow forts and foxes, snowmen and wolves. The whole article is about how these wolves are hanging around this guy's yard, and his grandchildren built a snow fort, and the wolves are coming, and they all, he's photographed them peeking in the snow fort.
Oh, God.
And luckily his grandchildren aren't there all the time, and they weren't, they weren't in the fort at the time. But evidently this has been going on a long time, and it started off just being one wolf, and now it's got up to 5 wolves, and evidently this is going on every day now. And he says, the article says that they're constantly, every one of them come in and look into the snow fort. Well,
let me tell you,
example.
That's going on all over the country right now. Okay, and a lot of retired people and a lot of older people are saying, "Gee, my grandkids aren't going to come here anymore. Do I want to live here?" It's driving down home prices even more in rural America. But think about this: if your kid's out in the yard, your dog's out in the yard, and one of those wolves comes in and starts to go at him, towards him, and you shoot and kill the wolf, you face a felony charge, a federal felony charge, which is absolutely outrageous. All right, that means that you can go to prison, you can have a big fine. When you get out, you can't vote anymore, and you can't own a gun anymore, which means you can't live out there and protect yourself anymore, much less hunt or anything else. You can't even own a gun. All right? And when it happens, who comes in? The Fish and Wildlife Service will send federal investigators, special agents there, who are trained with the highest amount of training you can find because of Homeland Security work and all this other nonsense going on. And they've got forensic labs and that, and they pick up the carcass and they haul it away and they say, "Well, look at this, Your Honor. The bullet went in from behind the rib cage and came out by the front shoulder. Clearly the wolf was moving away from this man when he shot it, and we can tell that he must have been at least 70 yards away because of the condition of the bullet," or whatever nonsense they want to come up with, and put you in court. And they want to convict you because that's what they do, and that's what they get promotions for, and everything else is for putting the fear of God in their people about federal laws, all right? And you're up against a really big stacked deck. And on top of it, you're very likely to have some guys, too, or some woman agent who basically feels like you people are just awful, killing these wonderful animals that belong here, and they were here first, and clearly this is an example of why people shouldn't live out here, and this blah, 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 all driving them this ideology that is just absolutely foreign to those of us who live in rural America.
I want to deal with that here in just a moment, but I want to say to the callers that we have on the line, just hang with me. We will open up the phone lines and take your calls here real soon. So just hang on just a little longer. But, Jim, you said that, you made reference to the wolves being here first and all that. Let's address that because going back, I guess it was the 1960s when the turning point came and the wolf population started to increase. How many wolves are native to the United States? I mean,
back in the 1960s, when all this started, the only wolves in the United States that, other than Alaska, the only wolves that we recognize as being here routinely and established were in northern Minnesota. And they were under Minnesota authority, and there was a trapping season here for them and a hunting season. You could shoot them occasionally. But the way the state was dealing with them was they were keeping their numbers down in the hundreds, okay?
Okay.
So, I don't know. I didn't live here at the time, but as I understand it, a deer hunter could have shot one when he saw it, and some guys trapped them and sold the hides. And the effect was that it kept them at a pretty low level and pretty widely distributed, okay, in the northern part of the state, up there in the woods. And anyway, when the federal government came in, took control of them, and they said, well, we only want 1,600 there. Now you've got over 3,000, they say, and I would think there's probably closer to 4,000 if the way the other states are counting their wolves is any indication. But be that as it may, there were no other wolves here. They had been extirpated. They got rid of them because they knew from here, just like they did back in Scotland and Ireland and Britain and Germany and that, you can't live with them. You got to stay in small villages. If you're going to raise livestock, you got to stay with them 24/7. You're going to lose children during the winter and in the spring when they're looking for food for their pups. They knew that they were going to kill dogs. They know all. You can't have these big ranches with these large herds that you just kind of cut out there in the summer and let them graze and then bring them back in. You can't leave them out untended in pastures like they do right now and through the winter. And you can't live like that. So they got rid of them. There was a danger. There were people dying, people getting attacked. There was outbreaks of rabies. They were known to spread things like smallpox. They didn't even know about all this tapeworm business. That is another big thing. I wrote one article and described over 30 different diseases that they carry. 28 of them affect humans and a lot of wildlife. You can't live with dogs like we do now when you got wolves around with tapeworm problems and a lot of these other disease problems where you take the dog out and the dog sniffs around at a piece of wolf dung somewhere or piddles on it or rolls on the yard and picks up tapeworm disease, brings it into the house onto the carpet where your kid runs around, and the little kid puts his finger up in his nose or his mouth and he's got it. You can't let the dog come in the house and go into bed with the kids, and you certainly can't do this stuff you see on TV all the time where you see these people with their cat and their dog going, oh, hi, puppy. You're just asking for trouble, okay?
Yeah.
And even our veterinarians anymore don't even speak out about this stuff. They'll tell all of us there's got to be laws about vaccinating the dog and the cat, and you got to do this, that, and the other thing, but you're going to be putting these wolves wandering around at night through and around houses, through small towns and through garbage cans and in your yard and everything else out there that are not vaccinated for these things that can come down with rabies or distemper like in a heartbeat and spread it, as well as spreading other things. So they knew that they had to get rid of them. But the federal government in the 60s started put everywhere else you got them now in the lower 48. They're GI wolves. They're government-introduced wolves. We're talking about red wolves in the southeast, Mexican wolves down in the southwest, or this nonsense about gray wolves, timber wolves, and what was here before. They were just plain wolves. And just like deer, the ones that were in the south were smaller because mammals down towards the equator are smaller than ones up towards the North Pole. The ones up north were bigger. We might want to call these timber wolves because they lived in the timber, those gray wolves because they were found out there in the open plains for a while. But the truth is that there's no difference between them other than their size. They're all very vicious animals. They can breed with coyotes. They can breed with any species of dog you want to put out there. The word is breed, actually. They can breed with basset hounds. They can breed with German shepherds and have viable offspring. So this business about, that was the Mexican, that's a red wolf, you can tell because they're nothing but a big mix of dog, coyote, and wolf genes, and they're all one species. So that's what we're, suddenly if we don't save them, we're not going to have the cure for cancer and all this other stuff that they keep pumping out there.
That's the thing is that all the alarmism, and these groups really prey upon the ignorance of the public to facilitate their arguments and try to get this accepted by the mainstream.
They've got access to federal money, and they shovel it into those universities like they're cleaning out a dog kennel somewhere. And those professors and grad students in there all know where they're getting the money from and what it's for. So they grind out all this stuff about, they've got the longer ears and they're a little more red, and this, oh, yeah, you can tell when they do this and that, and we've got to save the New England cottontail because it's just nonsense. But they get away with it because there's no accountability, because it's a central government, as throughout the history of man, it's unaccountable.
And there's nobody to challenge them because most of the people don't have any idea what the truth is.
That's
they don't
right.
know the stuff that you know and haven't had the experience and the proper training. I mean, teaching and education. I mean, when you went to school, they taught more of the truth than they do now, as you just pointed out.
Big time.
All right, I'm going to go to the phones after the break. So Sherry in Kansas and Warner in Canada, just hang on with me. We're visiting with Jim Beers. Jim is retired from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service after serving for 30 years with that agency. Wildlife biologist, wetlands biologist, and special agent and refuge manager. He's got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge, as you can tell. And your phone calls are welcome. We're going to get into his story a little more as time progresses. I'm determined we are going to get that out there because I think it's important. All right, we're back. This is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks, visiting with Jim Beers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And let's go to the phone lines. The number, if you'd like to call in, is 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. And let's go to Kansas and talk to Sherry. Sherry, thanks for holding on.
Good morning, Darren and Jim.
Good morning.
Jim, I would like to offer, and this is from an article that Clay Douglas ran in the Free American back in February of 2000, and it is from an interview that Wayne Hage did on a radio station. And I think he tells the why of how you're telling the how. And he talks about our history of our national debt back in after the Civil War up until the 60s. And during the Vietnam War, we started borrowing money to run the Great Society program and the Vietnam War. And Charles de Gaulle started saying, I don't think you guys can pay for this. And he started raiding our gold. And when Nixon came in, he closed the gold window. And so they started with and Nixon started the EPA, and you talk about how the history of these other agencies, and they're collateralizing our national debt with our national resources.
Yeah, Jim, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'd like to just say that as I have been out of the government now for more than 10 years, and as I've written a lot and spoken around the country and met a lot of people, that I am more and more amazed at how related all these things are. And I don't pretend to be very smart about the gold standard or Charles de Gaulle. I know that Wayne Hage is somebody that I read about and have heard a lot of good things about, and I am impressed with how these things are all related. And although in my saying that, for what it's worth, I try to stick as much as I can to the things that I really know: the wildlife business, the logging and timber management, and range management, and rural life in general, and that pretty well occupies all of my time. But I appreciate hearing about this, and I've made some notes about it, and thanks for calling in about it.
Yeah.
Well, he gives the example of he lived in Nevada at the time, and he says, where I live in Nevada, we have major mines all around us, but the only mines that were open were the ones that were being mined by foreign companies.
Yeah, we've actually talked a lot about that on this program, and a lot of that, I do believe that's going on. Finding hard documentation, other than looking at and seeing what's actually going on around us, I think that you can certainly make the case for it. There's no question the foreigners are being allowed to come here. They're actually not only being allowed to come here, they're being recruited.
They're like Vicki was saying, in her research, and we're in the liquidation, man.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Hey, listen, I appreciate the call there, Sherry.
Bye.
God bless you. All right, tell you what. Well, we got a minute before the break. Let's go ahead and take Warner in Canada. Warner, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
You might not have a suit and tie, but, by the what you stand for, it makes you more of a gentleman in my eyes than many of the ones that appear in suits and ties.
Thank you. Thank you.
And who knows better about what happens out in the countryside and out in the rural areas and the people who live there?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And who is telling us, wants to teach us about what happens in the countryside? Who are the people who want to teach us? Most of them, they are living in cities.
Yeah,
and how many wolf packs do you see roaming around in cities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question about it. Hey, Warner, hold on. We got to take the top of the hour break. We're going to keep Jim for another hour. So, folks, you're welcome to call in, too, 800-313-9443. We'll be back.